July, 10 o'clock, and you're listening to me, Shamiza, on Inspire FM 105.1 FM. We are going out to the wonderful people, Luton surrounding areas, Peterborough Slam Radio and Sheffield's Link FM. Hope you are well, staying cool and winning wherever you're listening in from. It is Monday, so it means one thing. It's about motivating you on Where Else, the Urban Cube Show. Now, this show is a show that celebrates creativity and lifestyle, and we get to speak to trailblazing guests sharing with us their experiences, opportunities, and their journey. And today's show is no exception. I am joined by an extraordinary guest who is live in the studio with me this morning. You can actually see her on Facebook. We are Facebook Live, folks. So do get onto Facebook and catch everything that's happening in the studio. Leave your comments on there regarding today's show, and we'll read them out to you on the show. You can also WhatsApp us on 07779 481822. I am on today's show talking about history and talking about heritage and memories and marking anniversaries. Anniversaries that need to be remembered. And on Tuesday of this week, myself and a number of people were given the opportunity to attend an anniversary event. And this anniversary event is taking us back to 30 years to a place called Srebrenica, a place where over 8,000 Muslim men and boys were murdered in what the world now recognizes as a genocide. But Srebrenica is not just a page in a history book. It's a call to remember, to reflect, and to resist hatred wherever it rises. Joining us today is Dr. Helen Connolly. She's an associate professor, activist, and a leading voice in memory education. She's worked with refugee children, survivors of genocide, and communities across the UK to ensure that Srebrenica is never forgotten. Helen is with us today to talk about this event that is being marked on Tuesday, July the 22nd at Luton Borough Council. And it is on behalf of Remembering Srebrenica East England Board, and it's the 30th anniversary memorial of the Srebrenica genocide. And it's wow, I'm taking a deep breath because it's quite heavy and it's laden with a lot of history, and history that shouldn't be forgotten. And it's a solemn event that marks 3 decades since the genocide happened in July 1995, when over 8,000 Bosniak Muslim men and boys were killed, an atrocity recognized globally as a crime against humanity. The memorial will be an opportunity to reflect, remember, and recommit to the values of peace, justice, and unity. It's an event I'll have guest speakers, moments of silence, and symbolic acts of remembrance. And I'm really delighted to have Dr. or Professor Helen joining us today to talk about this event, because she plays a massive role in marking this remembrance anniversary. And as the founder, as the trustee of the East Anglia Board, and who's at the forefront of making people around us aware that we don't forget about this very, very dark time in history. So, Helen, thank you so very much for joining me this morning. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. You can hear I'm feeling quite emotional, and I'm going to try and keep my emotions at bay, because everybody who knows me knows that I get quite emotional about discussing such significant areas of our history that are kind of being lost. And we don't talk enough about. So I just want to say thank you so much for reminding us continuously that this is a moment of our history that we should not be forgetting.
Well, thank you for having me on. Thank you. You've been such a constant person who's been interested in the work of remembering Srebrenica, and so it's really great to be on the show. And there's nothing wrong with emotion. These are very heavy events. You talk about the importance of remembering history, but also it's a very alive history, which is very heavy to speak about. And actually, that's also how we deepen our understanding of things, is also by understanding our emotion. And I think, you mentioned I'm a memory educator, and I never shy away from emotion with my students, because it's a key part of deepening understanding and deepening our understanding of our own humanity in relationship with others, and whether those others feel like strangers. Our emotion reminds us of our humanity and of the invitation that those feelings create in us to act. And you've acted today by having me in, so thank you so much.
I'm humbled, and I really appreciate you being here, because I can appreciate it's like, you're very close to the anniversary date. It's the 22nd of July. So a lot of work, a lot of preparation has had to be done. But you don't just work in England, you also take trips to Bosnia as well. And how did this relationship with this part of history begin for you?
That's a really great question. I was just talking to my mum on text before I came on, just saying I am going to mention you. So actually, when I first started doing this, I've been working in this area for since 2015. I'm a human rights educator, so I work at the University of Bedfordshire, and I teach a lot of modules that relate to human rights, global governance, international criminal law. And so I've always taught about Bosnia. I've always taught about the genocide that happened in Bosnia as a precursor to thinking about things like the International Criminal Court and genocides and atrocities that happen today, and what are the mechanisms of accountability. So I remember being in Bosnia the first time and someone saying, what brought you here? And I said, well, I was preparing a lesson for my students on a module on human rights and global governance. And I came across this organization called Remembering Srebrenica, where you could take students on a field visit. And as I was talking, I was thinking, no, it's deeper than that. But I went, I had a coffee, and then I was like, my mum. So in the 90s, my mum, she had two jobs. She gave up one of her jobs in the evening to do humanitarian aid volunteering for Bosnia. So every evening she lives in a small town in Scotland, close to Edinburgh, in the Scottish borders, which might sound so far away from Bosnia, but she was so, we started off with emotion. She was so moved by her emotional response to what she was seeing on the news. You had, the very infamous, iconic scenes now of ITN News and the concentration camps in Prijedor. And my mum was so, and the images of Sarajevo, and my mum was so moved to act that she did this every single evening. And I didn't even make the connection until after I was kind of speaking it out. And so now I'm very clear that was a very deep connection. My grandmother actually also volunteered for the Red Cross. And so there's obviously something there in the family. And then also, taking my students out to Bosnia that first time in 2015, meeting survivors there in Sarajevo and in Srebrenica, and hearing the personal story. There's something very powerful about the personal story. That's not sentimental, that's very evidence-based when you talk about the power of oral histories and you talk about the power of personal stories. And actually, I just, from there on, I just became more and more embedded, interested. It became more and more central to my teaching. I was asked by Remembering Srebrenica to set up a board in the east of England, which I did in 2016. I continued to take students out a few times. Then I also work I do sometimes work with the Srebrenica Memorial Center. I sometimes teach on the summer school there. They have a genocide summer school, oral history summer schools. I mean, the Srebrenica Memorial Center is an incredible place. In Srebrenica, obviously, is an incredible place where they're collecting oral histories, they're collecting testimonies from survivors. Now, yes, testimonies were collected by the courts, but they're very legal, aren't they? So they've collected over 700 testimonies, including 100 testimonies from children. And they have a summer school which attracts students, so undergraduates, postgraduates, young professionals from all over the world. So diaspora from the Western Balkans, from Ukraine, from the UK, from all over. And so the relationship with Bosnia,
It's so
with
significant.
colleagues there has just
Wow.
become so embedded, and actually being for the last few years I've gone to Bosnia every July. So the official commemoration day is on the 11th of July, which is now a formal international day of commemoration. Within the UN, there was a UN resolution last year saying that this needs to be an international day of commemoration and reflection. So it's become such a part of my life. There's so much to say. I don't even know where to start. I mean, also one of a really incredible survivor called Nejad Avdic, who worked with my students in 2016. My students nominated him for an honorary doctorate at the university. And so, that first visit just created its own momentum. I mean, Nejad is phenomenal. I'm so proud that the university gave him an honorary doctorate. He was a child survivor. He was a child and was left for dead. He became a key witness in the tribunal at The Hague, a fundamental witness establishing the intent of the genocide. And actually, his story, I mean, if there are any publishers listening, it would be amazing. Any filmmakers, it would be amazing to turn it into a film. But he was a key witness in the Milosevic case. Now, Milosevic was the president of Serbia and was a key perpetrator of the genocide. And Milosevic actually cross-examined him in the tribunal. And he's written a book which is yet to be translated into English, which details all of that. And he has an honorary doctorate from the university for his incredible work, talking about his own experiences, talking about the importance of education. He's actually recorded a message for the event that you mentioned on the 22nd in the Luton Borough Council, so you'll be able to hear that. So yes, it's there's so much to say about why I do this.
I'm so grateful for you for taking the lead on this, because it just takes one person to keep this memory alive. And why, the question I have is, why does memory still matter?
Yeah, I think, because it's still a live history. So, I mentioned I was in Bosnia, I was in Srebrenica, just recently, a couple of weeks ago, and on the 10th of July, bodies travel to parts of bodies rather, they travel to Potocari, the cemetery in Srebrenica, and then they're buried on the 11th of July.
So bodies are still being recovered.
Parts of bodies are still being recovered.
30 years on.
30 years on. There were still 1,000. So this year there were seven parts of bodies. Often families will find one bone, two bones, and there's been really sophisticated DNA developed as a result of the horrendous ways in which the bodies were buried, instrumentally moved. So I think only about 10% of bodies found were complete, so to speak. The rest, because they were moved from the places where they were systematically executed, where the genocide happened, to secondary and tertiary graves. So the Bosnian Serbs wanted to make it look like it was infighting rather than a very deliberate execution.
Helen, Could I just ask you to just share exactly what happened in Bosnia or Srebrenica 30 years ago, for anybody who's not familiar with this part of history? I mean, I was at university when this happened,
Me too.
but there was there's a lot of young people that might be listening in who may not be aware, and that's why it's so important that we talk about this.
Absolutely. So, in a nutshell, people talk about it as being a Bosnian war. I think the uncertainty that, and sometimes people, even informed people, slip into that, but across the country. So while Srebrenica was determined by the International Criminal Court, by the International Tribunal rather, as being a genocide, this was happening across the country. So you had thousands of people being systematically killed, detained in concentration camps across the country, in Prijedor, in Foča, in Zvornik. Then you had Sarajevo, and basically with the dissolution of the former Republic of Yugoslavia, Serbia wanted to create a greater Serbia. So it wasn't keen on the decentralization that had been happening. It wasn't keen on the former constituent republics of the former Republic of Yugoslavia wanting independence. Now, Bosnia wanted independence, and the vote for independence was overwhelming. And Serbia didn't want that to happen. Bosnian Serbs didn't want that to happen. So they wanted a greater Serbia. Part of the greater Serbia they wanted was around certain territories, and they wanted to then ethnically cleanse those territories for the aim of a greater Serbia. So it was a systematic and coordinated criminal enterprise against Bosnian Muslims. There was, to quote the words of the director of the Srebrenica Memorial Center, Emir Suljic, who's also a survivor, with the aim of creating terror, destruction, and an ethnically pure territory in Bosnia. In a really important article he wrote a few years ago, he says the genocidal nature of the Serb project in Bosnia and Herzegovina was masquerading as war. So the International Criminal Tribunal determined Srebrenica to be a genocide, but there were also systematic killings in other parts of Bosnia. Just yesterday was a Memorial Day, actually, in Prijedor, where there had been over 5,000 people systematically killed. There were detention camps, as I said, all around, particularly around those areas that the Bosnian Serbs, supported by Serbia, which has been established in the courts, wanted to have as part of Greater Serbia. Wow. I hope that made sense, because it's very intricate, yes, but I've tried to kind of capture it in a nutshell.
Thank you so much. And this is why you're here, because your work is so significant. You are a dedicated activist in making sure that the world doesn't forget Srebrenica, and also the fact that the 30th year anniversary is marked, and that we learn from the lessons from this. But is the world learning anything from what happened 30 years ago? Because we still see genocides happening across the world.
Yeah, that's a big question. No, the phrase "never again" is just such an empty phrase. What does never again actually mean? There's a whole lot of academic literature around this. When we say never again, what is it we're talking about in terms of never again? I feel that it's the politicians that don't learn. I feel that on that human level, so many of us know, we learn, we care. Just think about the mobilization in relation to Gaza, for example. People care. It's when the politics get in the way, and the politics were in the way as well with Srebrenica and with Bosnia. I mean, we've heard phrases in relation to Gaza, for example, being spoken about as a slow motion genocide. I mean, that phrase was also used by the Venezuelan ambassador when talking about Srebrenica back in the 1990s. So no, we don't learn. And it's the politics that don't learn. And it's very difficult for us at that human level, whether we're community activists, educators, anyone, that disconnect between what we know is wrong and the way that the politics gets in the way. I mean, Srebrenica wouldn't have fallen had there not been all the politics that got in the way. So we don't learn.
Why does it fall on the shoulders of the activists, of the educators, of the artists, of the humanitarians to kind of make the world a better place, remind people of humanity?
Why does it fall on? I think, reflecting on, I think I was having a chat with someone before we came into the studio. I met a teacher just outside the studio, and we were talking about education, and they're a teacher in a primary school, and what is education? And there's a philosopher, Dewey, who spoke about how we think education is teaching about life, but education is life. And so I think when you're an educator, you have, not all educators, because we can sentimentalize education. I mean, educators have also been perpetrators of genocide. You saw that in Bosnia, you saw that in Rwanda, but I think, the good side of education is that it is about life. I mean, even I was talking with students at the Srebrenica Memorial Centre a couple of weeks ago, talking about the relationship between the right to life and education. So itself, so the right to life, that right within human rights frameworks is actually linked with education in, I don't want to get all legal, but in a general comment by the UN on the right to life, talks about the importance of education for the prevention of systematic violence. So I think in part it falls on educators because it kind of feels natural, particularly when you're doing that. Now, that's not to deny that there is the underside of that, which is education can also be used for great harm, can be used for propaganda, ideology, and has been used by genociders and genocidal ideologists in the past.
Folks, if you've tuned in, you are listening to Shamiza and Dr. Helen Connolly on the Urban Cube show. We are talking about remembering Srebrenica. It is quite a emotional subject. I do want to kind of pre-warn folks that today's topic is quite loaded, and so it should be, really, because we are remembering history, a history that shouldn't be forgotten. It is the 30th anniversary of remembering Srebrenica. And I'm joined by Professor Helen, who is the chair of the East Anglia. Do you want to just explain your role and what you do to listeners who've just joined us?
Great. So I am a trustee of an organisation called Remembering Srebrenica, and I'm also the chair of the East England Board of Remembering Srebrenica. Just to give you a bit of context on who Remembering Srebrenica are as an organisation. So it was set up in 2013 by Dr. Wakar Azmi, who's the CEO of Remembering Srebrenica, and Baroness Saida Warsi, I think, was also involved in the process to... you mentioned right at the beginning that there's people consign Srebrenica to history, or that history is lost. So the whole purpose of the organization was to keep that memory alive, to educate, but also as an organization, we are the official organization so we're the organization that organizes the official commemoration in the UK. I guess outside of Bosnia, where there is the official commemoration on the 11th of July, I think we're the only country that has an official commemoration like that. So other parliaments will, so for example, Nejad Avdic, who I mentioned earlier, he was talking in the Bundestag in Germany. So parliaments do mark it, but actually we are the only country that has an official commemoration. This year it was in St. Paul's Cathedral. It was attended by the a couple of the presidents of Bosnia-Herzegovina. It's a complicated presidency there, but the two of the presidents from the presidency were there. The Grand Mufti Emeritus of Bosnia-Herzegovina was there. I think the Imam from Srebrenica was there. Angela Rayner spoke. So the government was represented, various key figures, interfaith figures. I spotted the ambassador, the Palestinian ambassador to the UK. He was there. So we are we're the organization that puts that in motion. Then across the country, there are various boards with community champions who educate in communities.
And as you are a community champion as well, educating us, making us, keeping this memory alive. And we're going to be talking about exactly how you do that on the second half of the show. Folks, if you've got any questions, contact us on 077 7948 1822. We are heading to a break, and I'll be joined with Dr. Helen Connolly straight after the break, inshallah, to take any questions and to have more inspiring conversation. Assalamu alaikum.
This program will continue after the break. Continue listening to Inspire FM. Inspire FM.
Inspire 105.1 FM.
Gems and jewels. Wise sayings, interesting events, and moral lessons from Islamic history. A comparison to the generosity of Hatim.
A man from the Ansar went to Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma and said, "O Abdullah, a son was born to me today, and I named him after you, but his mother has died." Abdullah said, "May Allah bless you with your endowment and reward you for your tragedy." He called his agent and said, "Go immediately and purchase a young female slave for the child, so that she may suckle it. And give 2,000 dinars to the father, so that he can spend it in raising his son." He then said to the man from the Ansar, "Return to us after some days pass, for you have come to us at a time when we have very little wealth." He answered, "Had you preceded Hatim?" A man from the Arabs used as an example for generosity, by a single day, the Arabs would not be mentioning him today.
The perfect venue for your perfect day has to be the Barn Tea Green at Stony Lane, where natural beauty blends with rustic charm. With the stunning barn conversion, breathtaking garden room, private bridal suite, and landscape gardens set within the picturesque Hertfordshire countryside, this unique and charming venue is ideal for intimate nikahs, mendis, weddings, other celebrations, or business events for up to 200 guests with ample parking. For details, call 01582 800 222. Visit thebarnteagreen.co.uk or check out our Instagram at thebarnteagreen.
Had an accident, a bump, trip or fall? Then you need Claims Specialists, your first choice for accident claims. The specialist claims company on Dunstable Road in Luton. With excellent access to expert solicitors and on a no-win, no-fee basis, Claims Specialists use their 30 years experience to help get you the best compensation possible. For injuries at work, taxi, PCO and private hire incidents, road accidents and vehicle damage, medical negligence, plus rented housing disrepair. In short, when you need to make any claim, click on claimspecialists.co.uk or call 01582 733 222.
For specialist immigration services, the people to talk to settle a family member in the UK. M&K Solicitors. For all your legal solutions for family, personal injury, clinical negligence, civil and property law, M&K Solicitors. Internationally recognised. M&K Solicitors for local legal services you can rely on. Call 01582 732 503 or click on mnksolicitors.com. Your first consultation is free.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम, मेरा नाम किरण है। कोट कश्मीर ऑर्फन्स रिलीफ ट्रस्ट मेरा एक खूबसूरत घर है जहां मेरे साथ सैकड़ों यतीम और बेसहारा बच्चों की तालीम व तरबियत और पुरसुकून माहौल में परवरिश हो रही है और ये सब कुछ आपके तावन से मुमकिन है। अल्लाह से दुआ है कि अल्लाह करीम आपको सदा सलामत रखे और उम्मीद है कि आप इसी तरह अपना प्यार, मोहब्बत और तावन जारी रखेंगे। कोट UK ऑफिस 0300123774 court.org.uk।
From the studios of Inspire FM, the time is now 10:30.
Catch a creative vibe on the Urban Cube with Sister Shamiza.
Good morning and assalamu alaikum. It's 10:30, 21st of July, and I'm Shamiza taking you all the way up to 11 o'clock on the second half of the Urban Cube. It's an absolute pleasure to be in your company, folks. As always, thank you for having me and joining me this morning on Inspire FM 105.1 FM. We are going live and direct to the lovely people, Luton surrounding areas, Peterborough Salam Radio, Sheffield's Link FM. In the studio with me today, I am joined by the absolutely amazing Dr. Helen Connolly. She's an associate professor on children, youth and forced migration, and we will be talking to her today, exploring the legacy of the Srebrenica genocide and the ongoing importance of remembrance and education. Today's show is very reflective. It's definitely a powerful one. There will be themes of sadness, and maybe we'll be reflecting on trauma, so just giving a pre-warning to those of you that are listening in, but most importantly, the show is about memory. It's about why it's important to have remembrance. It's about marking history, and it's also about reflection as well. If you have any questions, folks, please do get in touch with us on 07779481822 WhatsAppers, and we'll be happy to read any of those questions out to Dr. Helen Connolly. And we're also on Facebook Live as well. She's in the studio with us this morning. Helen, thank you so much for joining us. I know this is quite a difficult time for you because there's so much preparation being put into place regarding remembering Srebrenica, and it's marking the 30th year anniversary. You are doing so much in making this memory continue and marking it. And it's such an amazing thing to hear that England is the country that actually really works hard in making this established as a day of remembrance. It was the official day is July the 11th, but in Luton, we've got July the 22nd. Luton Borough Council in the town hall is having a remembrance day or evening, and which I'm hoping to attend. And thank you for making that happen. We were speaking in the break, and it's just, one thing I notice about you, Helen, is you have so much empathy and compassion. There is so much warmth about you. You're softly spoken, but you carry so much on your shoulders. The testimonies of the survivors. How do you maintain this demeanor, knowing what you know, seeing what you've seen, experiencing what you've experienced in Bosnia?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, I think, survivors need allies, they need companions, they need their stories to be heard. Whilst you become part of the story upon hearing it, and I always emphasize that to my students, because you then have an obligation to then act. It's not my story, it's not my trauma. And so I'm just very conscious of that, and I feel it's a great honor actually to be able to listen to stories and they're also an important source of education. So it's not something I take lightly, but I also, when I work with survivors, and I just also feel a great deal of hope for what they're doing. So, often survivors can be compartmentalized as being victims. And actually, my colleagues and our column colleagues and friends who are survivors, they are, they have been victims of the most horrific circumstances and victims of history, but not passive agents in that. So immensely, they are the world's experts on Bosnia. They are world experts on oral history. So, we're talking about the importance of stories. There's an amazing colleague and friend who works at the Srebrenica Memorial Center called Hasan Hasanovic. He is he's the lead of the oral history project there, and what he has been able to create in terms of methodology and testimonies is phenomenal. So, there's a lot in there when you hear stories. So yes, there is the sadness, and and we can't change the history, but we can change the future through understanding the history. And so that's always what I go back to. And the work that's happening in the Srebrenica Memorial Center is incredible. They also have created a new space there. I mean, the Memorial Center is the former UN base of the Dutch peacekeepers, and that's another part of the history which is really important. It's also a former battery factory, where lots of the community in Srebrenica before the genocide, where they worked. And the space is being used in the most incredible, creative ways around memory. And there's this amazing new exhibition opening, which was funded by the Turkish government, and is just one of the most incredible exhibitions that I have ever seen in my life. And so there's a lot of sadness, but also there's a lot of hope for change. Now, that's not to be Barbie Brightside about it, because there are still challenges in Bosnia. There's cessationist politics, there's genocide denial, revisionism, even triumphalism. And actually, when you look at the model of genocide, there are 10 stages of genocide, and denial is at that end stage. So there's still genocidal ideology there through the denial. And also, most recent academic himself from Srebrenica talks about triumphalism also being the 11th stage of genocide. So there's all that there within the context, but still the stories are collected, the stories are being told, and they are so, so important.
Indeed. And thank you for continuing these conversations that need to be had. And how do you actually do that? What is it that you would like to see more of?
Yeah, I think, I guess reflecting the most recent UN resolution on Srebrenica. There are a number of things in that resolution. One of the key things in that resolution from the United Nations General Assembly is a commitment to education and a call on states to embed the events of Srebrenica into curriculums across the world. So I guess, I can't be responsible for that as a person. There are other people who are doing amazing work on that, but we can do things in our communities. And given it's the 30th anniversary this year, I would love for 30 schools in Bedfordshire to come forward to work with my board to develop education materials that we could use in schools. We have on my board, I have amazing people on my board. We have educators on the board we have who are very experienced in Holocaust education, in educating about Srebrenica. And so we would love to be able to go into schools, and with it being the 30th anniversary, working with 30 schools in the region.
It sounds perfect, the alignment there, because it is about the younger generation building their character, making them understand, and also repelling racism, repelling Islamophobia as well.
100%. And actually, when Remembering Srebrenica was set up, you know, the aim was to remember Srebrenica, hence the name, but also one of the allied objectives was to tackle Islamophobia and hatred in communities, to generate sustainable communities in the UK. So to learn the lessons, because it was, you know, deeply, deeply entrenched Islamophobia that was the mechanism for the genocide.
And I think this is what's not been remembered enough, that this Islamophobia was the reason that this genocide happened. And I sometimes feel that the younger generation might not associate the two.
Absolutely.
Here, see the word, or like the name of the word Srebrenica, but not associated with Islamophobia. So that's why the education of this is so important. So if there are any schools that might want to connect with you, how can they get in touch with the board, and how can they get involved? Or if there's anybody wanting to reach out to you, how can they do that?
Great.
Helen?
Yes. So can contact me at the University of Bedfordshire at my email address, which can I leave with you?
Yeah,
great. I think and it would really be important to do. I mean, going back to your point about Islamophobia, I mean, it was used so instrumentally, and history was revised, and the revisionist history was used so instrumentally by the Bosnian Serb Assembly to create fear of Bosnian Muslims. So revising history, going back to the Ottoman Empire, talking about reclaiming things, and it is, you know, it was instrumentalized, you know, the kind of derogatory language of the Turks being synonymous with Muslims and Islam, and so it was a key way in which the political perpetrators, the political stoked fear up in communities, so that to create distrust.
And we see this being used time and time again. When will it stop? Will it ever stop?
I think we can take responsibility for what we can take responsibility for, right? So we can take responsibility. You mentioned young people and that intergenerational responsibility. I think when we start taking ownership of intergenerational responsibility and education, and not just in formal settings, but in informal settings, then we can make big strides there. The bigger political stuff is different. We can use our voice. We can engage with the facts of history, and the facts of history are very different to narratives, which often get used. So narratives are much more fluid, aren't they? Whereas history, which you can get to through the lived experiences of survivors, where there are different kinds of truths. I'm not meaning different truths, but different kinds of truths. So factual truths, emotional truths, narrative truths, so the way that people talk about things. These are all things that we can engage with through education, formally and informally. And I think that's our responsibility. It's the responsibility. It's what you're doing with Inspire FM across a number of contexts, right? And that's what I do in education. And we can try our best to educate the next generation, and that's where the hope is. And I think we have our challenges in this country, but but we have a responsibility to educate about Bosnia. In Bosnia, it's more difficult to educate children and young people about the truth, because there is a segregated education system in some parts of Bosnia where, for example, Bosnian Serb children are getting taught a revised history. They're not getting taught about the facts of the genocide. And also the constitution in Bosnia is so difficult that how do you get education into a system where that is so constitutionally so difficult. I mean, I think it, I have a lot of faith in my friends and colleagues in Bosnia to do that, but we have a responsibility in that gap in the UK and in other countries to educate.
The question I have then is also, what responsibility do Muslim majority communities and organizations have in preserving these histories?
I think it's a responsibility of everyone. I think collective memory, we sometimes think is about the specific countries or the specific context, but we're all part of history, right? Sometimes we can feel disempowered. I think that it's important for all. It shouldn't just fall on the shoulders of some to talk about history. Indeed. Right?
Indeed. I agree with that.
And that's how I see it. And I think some histories will be more meaningful to for example, to Muslim majority communities. And it's about empowering communities to raise their voice. But I think I think that's the problem. Whole communities don't take responsibility for the things that's the responsibility of survivors, or that's Muslim history, that's not my history. And actually that's part of the problem, is that kind of that lack of collective responsibility. And that also gets into the politics as well, right, where you see certain countries in the UN abstaining, where you see so I think it starts in communities, and I hope we can all work together to keep memory alive.
Definitely. And so what would you say to somebody that would say to you that this was 30 years ago, why does it matter now?
It really matters now. So as we said right at the start, it's not history. There are still 1,000 missing persons around Srebrenica area alone. The last mass graves, I think, were found in 2021. There are still mass graves to be found. People know there are perpetrators alive today who know where those graves are, who could give some degree of closure. I'm not saying total closure. You can't ever have, with that kind of grief, how can you ever have closure? This is not a history that is consigned to the past. You have politicians in Bosnia, cessationist politicians, Bosnian Serb politicians, and also you have Croat nationalists as well, who instrumentalize history. And so the history is just as important now. I mean, I don't want to be over dramatic here, but I firmly believe that had Putin if he is not still fighting in Ukraine, then actually the next line potentially would have been Bosnia, because of the vulnerability. Now, I don't want to be super dramatic about that, but actually, it's not history. It's really important to emphasize it is not history. It's really important to keep this conversation going. We can't forget Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Because sometimes what worries me is that, we talk about meaningful allyship, but then when it comes to genocide awareness, there's also this thing about performative solidarity, where people are just, oh, yes, it shouldn't happen again. But what can people actually do to stop this?
I think that's where the importance of, there's a philosopher called Emmanuel Levinas, who is long gone now, but writing after the Second World War and writing after the Holocaust, writing in that context of great despair, says that the epiphany of humanity lies in the face, or something like that. And so I think, it's about the human encounter, which changes us and the story. And I think, that's why I keep going back to the importance of the story. But that's, that's why, yeah.
And that's why you're here on the show. Thank you so much, Helen, for sharing your journey. I'm just in wonderment, really, and amazed by your level of strength and commitment to the cause of humankind. not just through an education stance, but actually really, like, you know, it's very tangible and tactile. It's not just words on paper and lip service.
I mean, I think that's where, I kind of lost my train of thought a second ago, but that's why the oral history, that's why the lived experience stories are important, because they are, you know, they are so different to the political narratives. So that was the point I was actually getting to there. And I feel that the making tangible differences in a world that can feel politically quite empty, where there are some political role models, but actually where that can feel quite hopeless at times. It's really important to connect in community. It's really important to connect with people who are doing good work in communities here, in communities in Bosnia, and that's what keeps me going.
It sure does, and it keeps me going as well. Listening into this, that there is hope. There are great people out there that are actually making a solid difference in reminding the world that never again.
I mean, those are empty words, but when you are having conversation with people who really care, who really have lived the experience, who care about the experience, who that's when you can start to change things, because there are always going to be empty words, right? I mean, I think idealistically we'd want to say no, but politics is a particular realm, right? And often an instrumental realm. And I'm sorry if there's any politicians listening. I'm not saying all politicians. We have great politicians. We have local politicians coming to the events in the council, and they are terrific, and they're outspoken on lots of things. So, you know, they are role models. But actually, you know, when you know what I mean. There are empty words.
So what can we expect on the 22nd of July? I know this is an invitation only event, but what could I expect if I attend? What would I take away from this event?
Yeah, so I think so there are a number of speakers at the event. So there are, you know, local leaders, messages from MPs. Importantly, there is going to be a message, and I mentioned earlier, from Nejat Avdic, who is a survivor of the genocide. He was left for dead as a child. He was part of the column of 15,000 men who tried to escape Srebrenica, who were captured and then bused to execution sites. So we talk about Srebrenica, but actually Srebrenica is a small town, and the execution sites happened around the town in various sites, and he was taken and he was left for dead. He was still alive, along with one other person, and he is, and as I mentioned earlier, he became a key witness in the International Criminal Tribunal. He has left a video message for us, and there are important takeaways there around not forgetting, around the key events that happened around Srebrenica, and around the importance of education and the value of coming together to commemorate.
After the event, what would you like to see happen from those participants who've attended the event? What more can be done, and what more can we do?
Yeah, I think for us all to come together and think about how to actively remember in our communities, how to work with young people as change makers of peace. Because, not being sentimental, but young people are the future, and how we can work together as a community to educate about difficult histories, about peace in communities, what it means for our communities here. How can we empower young people to want to go into work in these areas? You know, like, we have a lot of talented young people in Bedfordshire, How can we bring them together? How can we give them spaces to speak about the things that they want to speak about? So I think that's our key task, actually. But fundamentally, to get this embedded into schools in the region, and to get young people knowing about it. Most young people do not know about genocides that have happened across the world, and it's really, really vital that they do.
And it feels that those that are aware of present genocides that are happening, their voices are being quashed and being censored. So it worries me about freedom of speech for young people as well, because everything is just so conditioned. It's another show. We've got about a minute or so left. Is there anything you'd like to reflect on, Helen, and also give any social media handles and how we can connect?
Yeah, I would just like to say thank you so much for having me on. You've been so committed to the work of the board for a long time, and we really value that. We really value allies in this area. We value opportunities to speak about it. I'd really just encourage people to look on social media for Remembering Srebrenica. We have Twitter, we have Insta, we have, what's the other one? I'm not very good on social media.
TikTok? Are you on TikTok?
TikTok. What's the other one? Blue Sky. Anyway, we have just Google Remembering Srebrenica and you will see a number of social media things. But please do reach out to me. I really want to make this getting it embedded in schools. It's really important for young people to have these conversations. They open up conversations about other things that young people feel worried about, and gives young people agency around their future, even though we think we're talking about the past. We're not.
And that's the most important thing about agency. Thank you so much, Dr. Helen Connolly, for joining me this morning to talk to us, to remind us about remembering Srebrenica and why it's important to talk about this lived history. And I'm really looking forward to the event that's happening this week. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And it's the end of the show. Catch me next week. Assalamu alaikum.
Coming up next, Awaz-e Haq with Hafiz Ijaz.